Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining this standing room only discussion on aligning capabilities to meet global security challenges. I'm Don Zimmerman with NetApp, and NetApp is honored to be a supporting partner of AFCEA's TechNet Cyber. On this panel, DISA's senior leadership will address the cyber challenges that the agency faces and how we in industry can help. As the intelligent data infrastructure company, NetApp helps the warfighter tackle security and cyber challenges as the only storage provider to provide CFFC at the top secret level, being the only storage company to give our DoD agencies an anti-ransomware guarantee for their data, and being the only storage vendor with native first-party services in all three GovClouds, and also being on JWCC. Our moderator is Mr. Chris Barnhurst, who, as DISA's Deputy Director, delivers efficient and effective IT services to support DoD warfighters globally. As a senior executive for 7 years, Mr. Barnhurst was previously DISA's CFO over its $11 billion budget and created significant departmental savings as a senior manager of DISA's DeWickif budget through DoD-wide adoption of more efficient technologies. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chris Barnhurst.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, so I'll have a couple opening remarks, and then we've got a good panel discussion set up for you guys today. Before I jump into it, though, I would like the other panelists to have an opportunity to just introduce themselves briefly, so I'll go down the line here and start with Steve to my left.
All right, afternoon. My name is Steve Wallace. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at DISA and the Director of our Emerging Technology team. That one.
Hi, good afternoon. Jason Martin. I am the Acquisition Director and the Component Acquisition Executive. In the real world, what that means is program and project management across the agency.
All right, good afternoon. I'm Tanisha McMillan. I'm the Acting Director for Operations, Plans, and Exercises, which is our J357.
Afternoon, everybody. I'm Jeff Marshall. I'm the Acting Director for the DISA J9 Hosting and Compute, which for all of you would mean that I oversee our hybrid cloud operations.
All right, very good. Okay, so just to kick things off, we mentioned a little bit of cybersecurity and threats at the outset here, and we're actually going to broaden the aperture a little bit. First off, within the agency, historically, there's been this sort of ongoing debate about, what are we? Are we a technology agency? Are we a telecommunications agency? We do a lot of contracting, all those kinds of good things, right? Kind of what's our identity? And I think one thing that General Skinner has made very clear to the agency, and we've foot stomped at every turn, is we may be all of those things, but first and foremost, we are a combat support agency, full stop. What does that mean? Right? We are about providing the joint command and control, joint enabler type capabilities that allow the joint force to be successful in defending the country and our interests, at home and abroad. And so what we want to focus on today is sort of under that umbrella, a couple different things. One, the rollout of DISA's DISA Next strategy, which many of you hopefully have had the opportunity to take a look at. But if not, we'll expand upon kind of the key tenets of that throughout the discussion here. And then nested underneath that, the kinds of things that DISA is providing in today's environment and that we intend to provide going forward, where we need your help from an industry perspective, or if you're a DoD partner, in many cases, the same tenets apply going forward, so that we can be successful in delivering what the department needs, for the fight of tomorrow, if you will. So with all that as kind of a lead-in, I'm going to start out. I'm actually going to tee up a question to my good friend Steve Wallace here to start things off. And it kind of goes like this. So Steve, I think everyone in the audience probably knows that there are three key problems that must be overcome for quantum computing to be successful going forward. Quantum decoherence, error correction, and scalability, all of which I assume you're familiar with.
Deeply.
Each is a major hurdle. So can you talk a little bit about how we're working with industry to solve these critical issues? All right, I messed with Steve. That wasn't on the docket.
Get a whiteboard, folks. Let's go.
I thought it would be fun just to throw him a quantum curveball, because you got a lot of quantum questions this morning, as I understand
it.
We
did, and so the topic of quantum is an interesting one for us. The department has a number of needs around the topic of quantum. Quantum computers are not everything. Traditional compute will live and typically live side by side with a quantum computer. It's not necessarily DISA space immediately. With respect to quantum, the quantum resistant cryptography problem is one that we are very interested in. As we talk about the protection of data, that sort of thing, transport around the world. So our work around understanding the impact of quantum resistant algorithms on the workload, whether it be from our J9 through the operations side of the 357 to the way that we acquire capabilities, is something that is near and dear to our heart. So a lot of space to learn. We can have a debate around quantum mechanics, maybe over beer or something like that later. But I appreciate when you read that, I was like, oh man, where's he going?
This is why you don't try to stump the CTO right out of the gate, right? He just throws it right back at you. I got asked a similar question for the record at a speaking engagement, and I just said no. Then moved on. All right, so back to our regularly scheduled programming. Tanisha, I actually wanted to start with you. You mentioned serving as the acting director over exercises, plans, operations, right? The J5 has had a huge role in forming the DISA Next strategy, along with a lot of input from across the rest of the agency. So I wonder if we could start out with you just kind of framing that for the audience and what it entails.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Chris just mentioned, our J5 team has been doing a tremendous job of working across the organization and really identifying where is DISA headed, right? Stabilizing the priorities across the FIDEP is something that you probably have heard the director talk about, that I think is really pivotal in changing how we're looking at strategy within the organization. For example, we pulled in an Army strategist that's never been done in the organization before, in working across the agency of identifying what is that tension between where we are today, where we need to be headed, and moreover, how do we pull in our J8 team or our comptroller team to make sure the underpinning of even our POM cycle, we're aligning with that. So some of the key themes that I hope we talk about and certainly expand, not only from stabilizing our networks, talking about the ICAM zero trust capabilities, but also some of the programs that are going on within the acquisition arm side of the house. All of that is nested across the strategic imperatives that the director has put out across the agency, but I offer has really been a partnership in the glue that we've seen across the agency writ large.
Sure, and so you bring up ICAM, which I want to come back to because I think that's key in that it underpins almost everything we're going to talk about, if not everything we're going to talk about up here today. But before we get there, I mentioned CJAD C2, which is a bit of a buzzword in some circles, right? But it means a collective set of things that are real in terms of what the department needs to be effective going forward. So, a joint network, right? Deployed forward, operational cloud, those kinds of things. So Jason, I was going to turn it to you to talk sort of what we're doing from an acquisition perspective under that CJAD C2 umbrella, and maybe with a heavy focus on transport, if you can.
So the cool thing about the queries we get about CJAD C2 is we're the only place in the department that actually provides CJAD C2 today. So I'm going to talk about the four primary areas, but every time we're asked, or we go down to the Pentagon, or we talk to the Joint Staff or the combatant commands, we are quickly able to pull out a placemat that says, "Did you know?" And we go through these four areas. And then to Tanisha's point, and I think we'll talk a little bit later, every single thing we're doing today will be evolved into the future, which will then lead to additional CJAD C2 activities. So as Chris mentioned, the key thing, and it's interesting, when General Skinner gave me PEO transport last year, I knew a grand total of not much about PEO transport. I will say it has been by far the most exciting and interesting workload that I've ever worked with. And I've been at the agency a long time. I've seen some pretty cool things. But the really interesting thing that I've learned is that truly is the basis or the foundation for every single thing the department does. The fact that we're able to provide those capabilities today and then enhance them to really provide that resiliency to ensure that CJAD C2 is a thing and that we can coalition operate and work together to ensure that that information is always flowing. Important things we're doing in that space is providing resiliency, and I can't tell you exactly how in some cases, but we're doing a lot to enhance that network across the globe. And then we're starting to venture back into space in the sense that we're starting to look at PLEO solutions. Chris and Steve and I have had quite a few discussions with Chris Pachkowski about what the requirements would be there and how we're providing that additional resiliency up into different layers of the atmosphere to make sure that we can continue to flow that data and communicate effectively when needed. Moving off from the network side, Jeff's going to talk a little bit about really pushing that data out to the edge and bringing compute to everyone that needs it and where they need it. So obviously without that resiliency, without that interconnectivity, we're not able to get that data there. So from that perspective, we're an enabler. We're providing capabilities in the cloud environments to make sure that the warfighter does have that data access at their fingertips. Obviously, from a services perspective, under PEO services, we're doing a lot of things already. You think about GCCSJ, Global Command and Control, JPES, Joint Plan Execution. We're working through delivery in that space. Electromagnetic battle management, right? All these different collaboration capabilities, real-time capabilities that we use to then see to across the department, across that resilient network, and then provide all those capabilities again at a user's fingertips in the case of mobility, for example, right? These little things right here comes from that group as well. Those are all components that provide that CJAD C2 experience. And then of course, like we talked about briefly, Thunderdome and ICAM, all the cyber capabilities to be able to not only when you're connected, but then protect, ensure that you are authorized to see that data, have the identity to truly see that data, and ensure that all that data flows where it should, when it should. Those are the components that we already offer today as part of JADC2 and that, or CJADC2, and that's also what we've then evolved and built into the DISA next strategy with the J5.
Yeah, so just to expand on, Jason, one of your points there, something like PLEO, right? It's kind of all the rage these days. You hear a lot of people talk about throughout the department the need for PLEO type connectivity, and that can come in many forms. Many different industry partners are either in that space or developing offerings in that space. But the thing that's different about the way that DISA approaches this, and this is true, I think, across a multitude of problem sets, is that right now, a lot of the PLEO activity in the department is siloed. It's individual units solving their individual specific problems, right, as opposed to solving an enterprise level problem. And that's really what DISA is after is, I call it almost adding a dimension to the network where if you think about our terrestrial environment today, we want to make that a 3D environment and replicate that at the space layer basically and provide the downlinks right into the terrestrial network to get data where it needs to be kind of anytime, anywhere. So it's not, we're not taking over what Space Force is doing, right? It's providing that kind of downlink into the environment that DISA is responsible for at the enterprise level, so that components across the department can leverage that as opposed to have to creating their own bespoke or unique solutions again and again and again over time, which may work for them, but it starts to create interoperability and potentially other issues over time. So I just add that as kind of a nugget of, that's a common theme throughout a lot of these service offerings, that the agency brings to bear. So Jason talked a lot about transport and a couple other things that maybe we'll circle back to. But obviously transport's there for a reason. It's to get data from one place to another, right? And so I want to kind of kick it down to Jeff to think about or talk a little bit about our OCONUS cloud activities and some of the other initiatives that you've got going on in J9 that play in that space.
Sure. So within the hosting and compute, what we're really thinking about is what is the hybrid cloud computing environment that we need to think about as far as DoD and our mission partners that are not only here in CONUS but outside of CONUS. And what we quickly realize is that in order to provide the best tactical advantage that we can, that not everything the data can't all be processed here back in CONUS. So in order to overcome that, we have deployed out systems, and we're putting into place more systems that allow us to put our environment, a cloud environment, out overseas, whether it's in the Pacific or whether it's in Europe or in support of Africa. And so two of those are Stratus, as well as the Joint Operational Edge, which is the tactical edge for us. So those capabilities are really going to allow us to help our mission partners who are outside of our borders to get their data processed, get it coalesced, and get the information back that they need as quickly as possible without the latency that they might expect if it were all hosted here within the borders of the United States.
Very good. Thanks, Jeff. So I want to come back to a point that, Tanisha, I think you raised, touching on identity. And Jason, this could go to you or Steve. Let you guys fight for it. Obviously, DISA has rolled out an enterprise ICAM solution for the department. If you sat through Leslie Beaver's keynote a minute ago, you heard her talk about federated ICAM. And so I wonder if you guys could just expand on what that means in the DISA world and how we see that playing out within the department going forward, and why federation is important in the ICAM space.
So I'm going to defer to the godfather of identity in the agency. Steve and I actually fought over identity back in 2010.
Yeah.
So there's a history there. Go ahead, Steve.
Imagine how riveting our conversations are when we fight over identity.
The lunchroom's a blast. So ICAM is foundational, especially when we talk in the terms of zero trust. The reality, though, with a lot of the ICAM work, the technology's not terribly hard. The technology's mature. The technology has existed for 20 plus years in many cases. Where the challenge comes down and where things are interesting within the department is around the governance, around the attributes. I can give you the finest of identity providers and directory services and that sort of thing, but if it's not populated with meaningful attributes that application owners actually want to make decisions on, we haven't really given you a whole lot. So that governance aspect is something we're working closely with the DoD CIO's office with the rest of the services. When it came down to the discussion around do we federate or do we go with one monolithic ICAM approach for the department, it really came down to the speed and our ability to tailor capabilities across the department. I'd love to have one. The reality is the amount of bureaucracy that would likely create when organization A needs a new attribute, but organization B disagrees with what that attribute value should be or whatever. Again, going back to that governance, it wouldn't get us the speed and the capability that we need for the department. So federation is super important. Federation, though, also gets into when we don't have identities within our systems, meaning when we need to interact with organizations like the Intel community or DHS or your Fed civilian side, the notion of identity federation becomes even more powerful. So gone are the days, and it really wasn't that long ago, where we said, well, we need everybody in our directory service and we need your certificates and we'll do authentication there. And that federation buys us a whole lot. I'd say the other side is the audit component and being able to see the way that users are interacting with applications. So by centralizing that authentication, sort of moving it to the center, helps us with that. It also, frankly, helps us defend the situation a little bit better because we're not having to look as closely at the end applications. Certainly we are from a general audit perspective, but from the authentication side, by centralizing that, it gives us a more easy way of seeing what's going on with respect to authentication and authorization within the department.
So we're always asked, how can industry help, right? So Steve and I started working this, I think it was like 2010 was when we initially got the requirement. We built this pretty cool enterprise identity solution that exists to this day that we've evolved and became GFUD and a few other things. But where you all can help is every single one of you has work across the department building either enterprise or small applications that must communicate. Please use those standards. Please integrate enterprise standards. Please learn from us at the enterprise level so it's far easier for folks to federate so we can get those capabilities out the door faster. There's a lot of things done in silos. Doesn't need to be. You all have units in other parts of the department. Please leverage those relationships, and as you build to our requirements, make sure you're delivering an enterprise-capable solution.
All right, so I'm going to jump from new-ish to old and then back to new again, just to keep it on our toes here. So why do I say that? We like to talk about the new shiny things, where we're headed, right? Kind of the North Star, et cetera. But in doing that, the department, I'd say oftentimes forgets about the old, right? And we let it linger and languish out there until we get to a point where the costs are prohibitive. People are on eBay for parts, right? Not something we want to do. And so I want to foot stomp, and this is another area where potentially industry can help, TDM elimination type efforts. And Tanisha, I'll let you chime in, if you will, on an operational point of view here in a minute. But we see this as an area where the department's carrying significant risk. Industry, frankly, has started to turn off these connections and or raise the prices of them, in some cases 1,000% at a time. And so we are trying to push the rest of the department to get off of this technology as fast as possible to enable us to remove it from across the backbone as quick as we can. Solutions in that space that allow us to accelerate that, if they exist, right, would be extremely helpful. I'll throw out a number. I think we carry something like $70 million a year in costs on the backbone for legacy TDM costs, right? Would love to be able to invest that in something new and shiny as opposed to old and out of date. And Tanisha, I don't know if you want to talk on the TDM side, just some of the operational issues with seizures and other things we've run into in that space, just briefly.
Okay. Yeah, so I think first I'll start the conversation with, like you mentioned, of the need to really accelerate and modernize our capability. When I think about our responsibility operationally and our global posture in over 10 countries, our mission space of how we're charged to run networks, unclassified all the way up, to provide a lot of the capabilities and cloud capabilities that were highlighted here. What we are doing today is not going to get us where we need to be tomorrow. And when I think about that, I think about the automation and, like you said, getting out of the legacy churn that we're in that is absolutely being lost in the conversation. And so one of the things that I've actually been looking at and thinking about is our operational posture globally, quite frankly, of one, how do we strategize to leverage automation from that perspective, but then also to work with Jason and company of capabilities, and certainly Steve from a technology perspective, of looking at our capabilities that we have on the floor, but then also to how we work with our Five Eye partners, how we're working with our public and private partnerships to really accelerate our operations team. One of the things that I think we're plagued with, and certainly we're working with internally, is our inability to be proactive versus reactionary when it comes to how we are looking at our global posture. So that's something that I've been charging my team with and thinking about from that capability. But certainly from a TDM perspective, and I know, Jason, you have some thoughts there, is something that is unpalpable of where we need to go to consistently protect against the threats that we're faced with.
You want to jump in, Jason?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out, there's so many different ways I want to go that involve industry here and us. The easy button's legacy, right? The easy button is do what we know how to do it, and it's leverage existing circuits, it's use what we already have, build upon. In some cases, we tell you that. That's not always the right answer, right? Our job is to modernize and provide a set of capabilities that are able to connect the warfighter to what they need, the data they need. So as you bring us solutions, do think about automation. If you know we can do it better, leverage your in-house expertise to say, hey, here's how we're doing things in industry. It may cost you a little bit more, but we're going to run it by the seniors and say, does this make sense, yes or no? And we'll say, okay, let's go ahead and invest. To that point, the sooner we can free ourselves from that older technology, we can start to invest more in your futures and ours and make sure we're rolling out those new capabilities. And then Steve and I can really plan for the future from here's a new technology space, here's a hindrance, let's move that aside and then go ahead and build to the future. And then we do that in conjunction.
So the other thing I'd add to that is oftentimes our toy boxes overfloweth. By that I mean we have plenty of tools, we have plenty of capabilities. We don't actually use them well. We don't use them to the fullest extent of what they're capable of. We need that help to nudge us as well as everyone else around, hey, you bought this, you're spending this amount of money. Oh, by the way, 50% of that capability is going unused. Have you thought about these things? It really, a lot of times, right, and I've watched it happen many times, we get very focused on, okay, we got to get it out the door. Then we cross the finish line for that immediate need, and then we go into an operations and sustainment mode. Not that there's anything wrong with operations, Tanisha. But we get into that mode of, okay, now I'm maintaining. The reality is vendors are adding stuff to the product sets all the time that maybe we don't fully appreciate. And so And I'll put this out there. If you find that is happening in any DISA program, I think the 4-5 folks up here on the stage would be quite interested in hearing about that if you're actually seeing that happening.
Yeah.
And let me add to that as well. So I've come from private industry. I've only been here like 4 months now. So what I notice is that where we need to be is a more agile mindset, just like in private industry. In order to get there, we have to stop thinking only in the next year, only 2 years out, maybe we'll look at 3 years out. No, we have to really start looking at what's beyond us personally in the position that we're in to what does the functionality need to be of DISA as a whole and of our directorates 5 years out, 10 years out, 15 years out. We have to start thinking along those lines and then building backward from that with an agile mindset that says, how do I do that? Still be flexible enough to counter anything that may pop up over the next year or 2 years, but still be able to stay on track. What I'm finding is that industry, you have to help us with that. Right? When I was in private industry, it was easy for me because revenue drove everything. You had to be agile in order to keep up with the next greatest whiz-bang thing that your competitor put out. Here, it's not quite so much. So here we need your help to help us stay on track with this agile mindset that we need to have so that we're able to do things in a more flexible, agile manner.
Good. So,
Got some claps from that.
Yeah. Standing ovation over there.
Yeah.
All right, so I said we'd go old school and then we'd bring it back to new again. And I think not mentioning AI on like an ID panel is a fireable offense. So
30 minutes. 30 minutes. We made it.
30 minutes,
Yes.
Steve. But here we are. So can you talk about generative AI and AI in general, and how do we see that in the DoD space? How do we turn that into a force for good in our environment? Those kinds of things going forward.
Sure. So, there's a number of things underway already. Yesterday, I was chatting with the director about this, and I used the term measured in our approach to AI. One, and this one's a no-brainer, we're seeing AI integration more and more into the COTS platforms that we already buy. We're seeing it across the board. It's happening. In most cases, it's done pretty well. In some cases, it causes us a little concern based on the way that maybe some of the queries go out the backside of the given application. But all in all, we're excited about what we're seeing, whether it be in the office suites, whether it be in the SIMs from a defensive cyber side, the way that we see some of that AI integration going on right now. And then we also have the challenge around deciphering what is real and what is potentially not. We've seen repeatedly, I'll be very blunt here. We've seen repeatedly in industry where some of the capabilities have been a bit, let's say, overstated, and that you find out kind of behind the scenes that there was a little bit more sleight of hand going on there. But it doesn't mean that there's not good happening. I'm certainly not a skeptic. I'm very excited about what we're seeing. But our approach is to be measured about it. And where do we get the biggest bang for the buck in terms of our investment? I've joked many times, my team in particular, our folks focused on AI. We grew the team by 50% last year. I'm looking at one of them back there. We grew the team by 50% last year. They're all turning around. Grew the team by 50%. We added one person. It was awesome. So it's a finite resource, and what do we chase versus what do we defer is often the thing that we're up against. In terms of bang for the buck, the defensive cyber ops side, our analysts are overworked, underappreciated, and we've got to get them more finite tools. And how do we augment them when they go to dissect an attack and kind of figure out what's going on in the network? Operationally, the operations side, I see a lot of benefits there. For us, we have a number of LLM. We have at least 2 LLM projects going on. Some of you also may have seen the cyber-related AI RFI that we put out there. I've had a number of questions about that already today. We've received over 100 responses to that one, which is encouraging, but the team is going through and sort of triaging that right now to understand how we want to approach the problem going forward. So I'd say that, again, when it goes to AI, very interested to see how things are being integrated. We see where large language models can change all aspects of the business. Right now, we're pursuing the ones that we feel have sort of the largest advantage. Internally, our goal is to have a chatbot so that we can start experimenting with a larger DISA workforce in about the next 3 months. And from there, we'll quickly move to trying to get those outwardly facing to bring some of that goodness to the department. The other side is, where can we partner? There's a lot of work going on around LLMs across the department outside of DISA's own walls. It's foolish if we think that we will have the only answer or the best answer. It's in the department's best interest that we partner with other organizations, with commercial vendors, that sort of thing, to bring the capability to bear.
All right, thanks, Steve. Okay, so I assume I'm doing a phenomenal job asking questions, but perhaps you guys have some questions out in the audience. So I thought I'd take a minute, just pulse the audience, open it up, see if we've had either any questions come in through FCA or if anyone wants to hop up and pose one to the panel. I see a hand up in the back.
Oh, there's no microphone. That's
It's
ideal.
coming. There we go. That's
Hello, everyone. So I'm actually not in industry, work with DISA. We're in my team's over there in the back, the CISRO office. So I would love to know how we can better work with industry to provide the PMs and the PMOs better services. Mr. Marshall, we were over there clapping because we love what you're saying. Working backwards is one of those things that we kind of stress. So is there anything that you guys see we could do better working with industry?
You want me to take a shot first?
You go first, and I'll go.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think, so for those who don't know, CISRO is our requirements management office within the agency, basically. So it's kind of a way for us to funnel both external requirements as well as internal requirements that meet certain thresholds through an office to do an initial analysis that then tells leadership, is this something we should take on? Is it a priority for the department, for the agency, et cetera? If so, how do we resource it, both from a manpower and dollars perspective? And then, let's give it legs and get it off the ground, kind of a thing. So from my point of view, I think our engagement within the agency across a couple different organizations, corporate connections, et cetera, along with externally with industry, as we get some of the bigger ideas in, to kind of pulse them and see what they have to offer, helps us set the stage early. Rather than us putting a lot of legwork into trying to solve a problem, it might already be solved. And so I think that's where a lot of the partnership with the folks in the room can come in handy, to say, how have you guys done this, right? How would you tackle this hard problem set? And then that gives us kind of a pathway to go down as an agency to make a decision on. Jason?
So that's my favorite question of every industry engagement. It's a two-way street. I'm glad you brought up CISRO and requirements. We only build things that we are required to build. The question is, do you know what we require, and more importantly, do we know what's required? How are we working through that process? How many of you write proposals?
Couple.
A few, right? Do we know what we mean when we put something out on the street? Right, we don't. Thank you. Be honest, right? We are challenged, right? We hear things, we think we understand things, we think we know what's going on in industry. I ask Steve every day a question about something on technology because we don't know everything, right? We know our bubble, we know our view. Number one, I think communication early and often is critical. It all starts with the contracting process. If we put something out on the street that doesn't make sense or isn't well understood, please ask, right? Expectation management. A lot of you have kids, right? You set expectations. They don't meet those expectations. You have a discussion, right? It's no different with us. We need to make sure that you understand what we understand. And then, as we award a contract, as we get deep into an acquisition, are we meeting each other's expectations? Are we delivering on time? Are we delivering against scope that we've agreed to? Is there scope creep? We haven't heard that 1,000 times in the past 2 weeks, right? Where'd that requirement come from? Oh, our vendor talked to person A in the Pentagon. They said we should go ahead and do this. We did it. Well, yeah, but you just took us off our critical path. right? It's all those things we have to make sure we're on the same page early and often. Every single PEO is committed to doing that. Every single other organization that's delivering is committed to doing that, but we don't know what we don't know. Communication, I would argue, and expectation management is probably our largest challenge with industry. I'm not saying it's brought on by industry. I think it's our ability to deliver as a two-way street, and we've got to make sure that we're all on the same page.
So if I can take a maybe slightly different tact from a different perspective. So there's a few ways to your question about how do we engage with industry. Nobody is sitting here because you have a poor product that you really don't want to sell us. Let's be honest. We know why you're all here. Many of you we work with. The point being is that there is a large desire on the part of industry to work with us, and a very much a strong desire on our part to work with you. The other transactional authorities or OTAs, that capability has been gangbusters. To Jason's point about we do the best we can writing a requirement set, and then we put it out there, close our eyes, and hope for the best. And then you look at it and go, what in the world were these guys thinking? And so it's the OTA process has been great from that collaborative back and forth sort of perspective. Several of the ones that we have done, we have most often not arrived at the conclusion that I would have predicted that we would have arrived at from the beginning. The other side, in terms of back to the industry engagement side, and to my fellow DISA co-workers or fellow civil servants or military is as best I can say this: be geeky, right? Go home, read, watch things like that. That's the best way that I've found to figure out what's going on in industry, who we should be engaging with. These sorts of events are wonderful for that, but also in your private time. The people that I've seen excel most in this field are the ones that when they go home at night, they're not necessarily just punching out and they're done. They're the ones that are doing the research, doing the reading, very deeply and very deeply engaged in the tech and want to move things forward. So that would be my other recommendation.
Let me add a little bit to this as well. So I gave a speech this morning where I talked about what DISA J9 is doing as far as being our own salespeople, right? So we're solution providers. We go out and we try and help mission partners to figure out what their hybrid cloud journey looks like, how to get started with it, how to optimize it, how to put workloads where they belong. It's the same concept that you should have with us. Don't come to us selling your product. 73% of customers will shut you down. I will shut you down if you just try to come to me and tell me about your product as a feature set. What I first want is somebody to come to me and talk to me about what is my problem, what is my need, and then help me with that first, right? Once we get to that point, and I understand what I need and you understand what I need, then we can start talking about what are the solutions, the optionality around that, and then we can start talking about what products you have that meet that solution. It's a mindset again, right? If we don't help each other out in that respect first, we're going to have a poor engagement. My team is going to have a poor engagement as I reach out to my mission partners for the same concept. And so it works both ways. So I just want to put that out there because often I'll have that person come up to me. And I learned this again in private industry. If you start with a product, 73% of the time you're going to get shut down. So let's start with the problem first and then let's talk about solutions.
All right, I'll just add one thing to pull this home, the strategy. I think it is very important that you understand strategically where DISA is going, where we're headed, and where you can help us there. There are three things that came to mind as I was listening to my counterparts talk. Be visible, be informed, and be engaged. Certainly from a communications perspective, there has to be a two-way street, but I think all understanding where DISA's headed and where we are now and where your capabilities can help foster those authentic relationships with government is where we need to be postured, and to me, that's how you drive success.
Good first question from the audience. Other questions out there? Got one up here.
Good afternoon. So you mentioned, or I heard that we are a global agency across more than 10 op centers, and we have lots of toys in the toy chest, right? Each of those toys are generating data. What are we doing to federate that data so that we can truly leverage the benefits of AI?
Do you want me to start?
I love how we all turn to Steve.
And I'm thinking, where in the heck is Caroline? Yeah, so that is an absolutely valid point. We probably one of our greatest strengths is our ability to generate data. One of the areas that we are working very hard to get better at is leveraging said data, right? I can generate data sets from all sorts of, whether they be sensors, appliances, what have you. It's what do we do with that data at the end of the day that is, so one of the things that Caroline Koharski's team is, as the CDO, they're working to start to catalog the data sets across the agency. Now that is an ever-changing, ever-evolving sort of thing. We will never be done. But her goal is to try to deduplicate or demystify some of that data. To your point about the use with AI, it's not terribly useful. And this is one of the reasons, again, back to my measured comment about the use of AI. I could take a RAG database as part of a large language model, fill it with all sorts of document sets or data sets. But if the data is conflicting, if the data is inaccurate, if the data is whatever, I'm going to suddenly give a poor answer back to the user that asks. And frankly, we're not in the business of giving poor answers to decision makers. We have to be as accurate as possible. It has to be referenceable, that sort of thing. So we are making progress. We are making headway. I saw Jason in here at one point, but on the DCO front, we are doing a far better job of bringing a lot of that DCO data set together and working with our operators. What do they actually need versus what can be thrown on the floor to try to make the better decisions around the data sets. So we're not perfect, but we're working to get there.
And I'll add a couple things to that, just from my point of view. One, for context, a little over 3 years ago, when I started in this role, we didn't have a chief data officer in the agency, right? So I say that to give you some sort of sense of where we started, right? And obviously we're on a journey now in terms of how we harness this incredible amount of data that we have at our disposal. But two, this is where, in my view, this is an area where we're open for business and need help. But I say that asking that people keep in mind that what myself, the director, are most interested in are solving this in chunks. What are the use cases that can be solved and can be solved relatively quickly to give us useful insights, whether that's at the defensive cyber ops level, whether that's fusing business data with operational data to give us better insights into how we're making decisions, right? There's a bunch of different pockets we could go down, but I'm a proponent of the snowball effect and wanting to solve a problem, showing its utility to the senior leaders at this table and others in the agency, and then building on it, as opposed to what I think often happens in the department, where we get so bogged down in having to tag everything, having to normalize everything, having to have policies for everything, that we don't prove anything out in terms of a useful solution set. So this is an area where I know myself and others are becoming more proactive in terms of seeking out those kinds of solutions in order to move the agency forward, I'll say in the near term. Tanisha, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was just going to say that this is actually where I'm extremely energized from an operations perspective in the J3 hat, because oftentimes when I'm looking at our floor and where they are having to synthesize all of the data to make a perspective and give a perspective to our senior leaders, to myself, on how our risk posture has changed from yesterday to today, we need to simplify that. So that's something that I certainly need industry's help on as a capability perspective, and where I think that there's strong partnership opportunity.
And shameless plug, and I know we're going to be competing with the happy hour, but on this stage at 4 o'clock will be the Converged Data and Analytics discussion, where Ms. Koharski will be present, and I encourage that very question.
She is present, but she's hiding.
Oh,
Is
where?
she hiding?
She's over there.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yes, I see her.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
She doesn't know what's coming for
She
her.
doesn't.
That's right.
Hey, Caroline.
A question's coming for you later.
4 o'clock.
Yeah.
Good deal. All right, other questions from the audience? Got one in the back here.
So I don't know if I should ask it now or if I should wait for the 4 o'clock session. But
Depends on how hard it is.
right, I mean,
We'll tell you.
It's all data related. So I've been with the agency for about 6 months now. I come from the private sector, and one of the main things we used to push from a product realm was just how do we make more data-informed decisions in order to optimize and expand our product service offerings and really remain in a best-in-class posture.
Yes.
So I know our customer base is a little different here, but we still want to remain in a best-in-class state to the best of our ability. So it's great to hear that we have a new data analyst officer that came into the ecosystem a few years ago. I'm wondering if there's any strategic plans with all of this buzz around generative AI to kind of take a backward glance and really identify like what are the main KPIs and metrics of success that we should be tracking from a data perspective so that we know how to segment and read and interpret a lot of this automated information that we're receiving from a performance perspective, and then leverage that information to make further future enhancements. I feel like, having AI as a part of the equation, we can automate so much of that. And so this is like a really great opportunity.
Sure.
Is there anything on the forecast for
So we
kind of
do
attacking
have a
that?
data strategy, which I'll let Ms. Kaharski talk to when she comes up in a few minutes. And I would say more broadly, we have done a lot of work around what those key KPIs are and how we want to integrate. I mentioned earlier business data along with what I call operational data to gain those insights. We've done that as an agency in the past. It's probably not as well known as it needs to be in terms of an effort. But that is something that I will, just for the interest of time, I'll let Caroline jump on when she comes up next. All good. And I know we got one more in the back here that we'll try to get to. At least I thought.
Quick question. The question from industry standpoint, looking at, let's say, fulfilling a need that we've identified or we've heard from you or we've researched. If we bring a solution that is not open source, is that something that you would look at seriously, or does it have to be an open source solution, especially along the lines of cybersecurity?
So I would say that we have a strong mixture of both proprietary as well as open source solutions within the infrastructure today. We don't shy away from either of them. There are drawbacks and benefits to both approaches. So, I assume when you say open source, you're talking from the code base side, or
Proprietary software and proprietary sensors.
I would say that we have a lot of proprietary software within our infrastructure, so long as the vendor can clearly identify and articulate the way that it operates and we can get it through a successful accreditation, then we have no aversion to closed source products.
Yep.
Yep. We got them all through the network. We often call it vendor in depth. We got a bit of everything, so yeah.
Good technical term.
Yes.
All right. I'm not sure how we're doing on time, but any other questions from the audience? Got one over here.
There you go.
So you talked about wanting to work with industry more, and one of the things that we find when we sell you a product, we're the specialist in it. We have a services division, but it's usually more expensive than a system integrator or a small business that wants to provide the services. So 9 times out of 10, you say, thank you very much for being the experts, but we're going to go with this cheaper cost. And no, it didn't work. And oh, now it doesn't work. We spent 3 years working on this and it doesn't work, and we're going to go rip and replace and go with something else. So how do we convince you to use our services from the beginning and save yourself the trouble? Without,
Assuming you don't want to make them cheaper, right?
well, we do that on occasion, and we also don't want to kick out the marketplace. Like, there are small businesses that need this business, but a lot of times they're not even certified in the product. They just say, we know this, we have past performance in it, but their past performance, they could have gotten kicked off the project, but they did it for 3 years, but they have past performance, so you've accepted it. So again, how do we protect you guys from your own planning.
Please save us from ourselves. Mr. Martin?
Well, I was going to say the CFO and the director of PSD left, so she was the one that asked me, or gave me the honest answer earlier to you. By the way, so it's a great question. It's a great question. We need to do a better job of planning, right? And that's exactly what we're trying to do. It goes back to understanding the requirement, understanding what we're buying, how we're going to buy it, and then more importantly, Tanisha cares about how we're going to operate it. Because I don't answer the phone at midnight unless he calls. It comes with right. He doesn't call me very often.
Something's on fire if
right,
I'm calling you at midnight.
It gets back to what I said earlier, right? Do we really know what we're trying to accomplish and the best way to get there? I think that takes education. That's part of that discussion piece when we go out with solicitations. We try to award contracts and then longer term, the sustainment. The other thing, and everybody knows, right? Money's at a premium. We can get it, but we've got to build that capacity by getting off old technology, by modernizing, by building in automation. That frees up that capacity for us to actually do what we need to do. So again, how are we evaluating what we've asked for? Do we fully understand it? And I think honestly, it falls on us from a planning perspective and then really understanding what we're buying, which gets to my point earlier. Tanisha in her new role, I'm confident she will be calling me late at night saying, Jason, why is this way? And I was like, I didn't know that. Let's go back and revisit, right? But I think it's a valid question. It goes back to planning, understanding, and then delivering. And what does it really mean, right? It would be wonderful. She's going to ask at some point, Jason, why don't you provide 24/7 support on this stuff? And I would say, not a requirement, and I don't have any money, right? So how do we prioritize that? Gets back to it as well. I know it's a non-answer, but it's something we've got to get better at. Go ahead, Steve.
I'd like to take a shot at it as well, right? So I agree with your perspective. Sometimes we often go to more the generalist versus the vendor specific. Now, to your point, sometimes it costs more money. Now, sometimes it's in our best interest to spend that money. If you look at, say, building a house, right? You don't have the general contractor do the wiring, do the plumbing, pour the foundation, and all those other kinds of things. It's probably not going to end well, to your point. Which is why you bring in those specialists for those particular things. You have a general contractor, which covers a lot of your engineering bases. Let's go back to the IT side of things. The way that in some cases, the way that we're trying to operate programs is you will bring in a general contractor for more of those general things. But for some of the specifics, we will bring in the specific vendors. To Jason's point, it goes back to how we identify the requirements. We likely need to write stronger requirements around some of those things. But I agree with your perspective. We need to find that balance and have that diversity of both the specialists as well as the generalists.
Yeah, and if I could just tag on, because before operations, I did acquisitions for many years, and so this tugs at my heart because one of the things that we've been talking about in the organization is how we get better at critical thinking. So Jason talked about, this need of the onus, right, that we need to take of how we're writing requirements, ensure that it's aligning with the plans. But one thing that I don't think we've talked about in our workforce planning in this conversation, but really trying to charge and ensure that our workforce is critically thinking through the things that we're even asking industry to do, right, as they're engaging, because it's not just the team that you see represented up here, but it's the other individuals that are represented across the agency that I think, as we are starting to have those conversations and doing that critical thought process of whether or not are the decisions that we're making today going to optimize us for success tomorrow, and how do we project, right, where we need to be just given some of our fiscal constraints. And I oftentimes think that critical thinking piece gets lost in conversation, just looking at perspective. So,
Okay. I think we're about out of time here, but I appreciate everyone coming and hanging out for a bit. Hopefully you found it informative, and thank you for the questions. Appreciate it. Have a good day.
Thank you, everybody.